So can you hear me all, guys?
Neeraj, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. Sorry.
Yeah, we can hear.
All right. So let's move into the microservice architecture. How do you define microservices? And then after that, probably we'll get into the demo and we'll see how to provision the service fabric cluster and then deploy an application. Right. So any
Still
application.
the voice is fluttering.
Is it? I don't know. Some problem with the Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's better. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so in terms of your application, any application that you have, it will consist of multiple service types. So every, you will define multiple services. All
Actually,
these.
your voice is breaking, Neeraj.
The voice is breaking still.
I don't know. So maybe, we'll have to get into the demo then, if you, can you see my screen?
All, sorry.
I think there is some problem with the mic, I guess.
Okay. Hear me now? Hello.
If you change your mic, just log in back
my
to
mic. Can you hear me
because
now?
that's the same thing which I was also facing earlier. So if you change the mic,
can you hear me now? Hello.
We cannot hear you, Neeraj.
Sorry.
we can hear you, but I would appreciate if you could log in back. That way, even if you are not using the mic, that would be connected.
Yeah. So
just a try.
okay. Can you hear me now? I mean, I have killed my Skype twice. Hello. Hello.
No, we can't.
And your request will be served from the healthy node.
Yeah.
So the capability of the Azure Service Fabric is very difficult to understand in one session, but we have to go again. It is more powerful actually.
Yeah, guys, I'm back. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, we can.
We are just utilizing time there.
Oh, sure. I'm really sorry, for all these problems with my internet. I switched to my public internet, so hopefully now it's much better.
Yes, much better.
Yes, it's better.
Okay, so let's move on to that. Quickly conclude into the demo, because I think we lost so much time. And so any microservice that you define, you will define at a service type. So you will create your service map, microservice map for your application, and then once you have defined the service type, every service type you will have your code wherein you write your code. Then you have config, which contains information about the configuration information about the application that you have built. Then and then you also have data. So if you're storing any kind of data for that service, image or any file that you have. So any service typically will have these three components. It consists of code, which is like which can also have a state. It consists of configuration information, so which goes into the config, and then it also has data package which defines static resources. Static resources could be images or anything, and the code package is where that's the entry point. That's how you call it. That any DLL or exe which gets produced, that's where the code is. So you have code, you have config, and data. So all you combine together, and then that defines one service type, and you have multiple service types, and your application can consume any of the service type and create an application. And these service types are reusable. Once you deploy it in Azure Service Fabric, any application can create and make use of this service type, and you will have multiple instances of the same service type. So it's like you create one, you define once, reuse. So that way You don't have to recode. You don't have to, one developer can make, as an enterprise, just think about it. As an enterprise, you have so many applications. All applications are monolithic and they're working in isolation. But all these applications may have developed certain codes which could be reused. Today, it's not possible because, it's monolithic. But if your enterprise moves towards this microservice oriented model, wherein you are hosting all your application as microservice, so your one team could have defined 10 microservices, another team, another 5, and another team another 5. Now all these 20 microservices can be consumed to create multiple applications. You don't have to recode. So microservice approach and Azure Service Fabric helps you promote reuse. So reuse, it will save you a lot of money, a lot of cost, development cost. It helps you, the upgrade each application, each microservice can be upgraded separately. So let's say if you have an application which used microservice version 1, and if the developer has deployed version 2, it can be rolling upgrade, and the other application which is making use of that can also use that. So it's much better development architecture or development environment that you will get within your organization, and you'll save a lot of money in terms of upgrade, in terms of code deployment, in terms of reusability. That's why a lot of organization is moving towards microservice oriented architecture. Another benefit is that you don't have to upgrade the entire application. You can just work on one service. If there is a new feature which is released, you released in one service, and it will not break your entire application. If it breaks, you can always roll back that particular service. So these are the benefits that you get when you microsegment your application, as opposed to
All right.
doing a regular deployment.
All right. So I bit got it, but if I'm wrong, just correct me or Neeraj. So it's kind of a CI/CD, I think. So you can do all these things in CI/CD platform. So you can do auto deploy, spin up, and test it. If you want to test the code, you can test it in a dev or development.
So CI/CD at application level, it goes one level deeper. So this is where we are talking about at the service level. So an application consists of multiple services. And yes, you can use CI/CD with the Service Fabric also.
Then how can I test the code at this?
You can do that. You can test the code. You can deploy this in dev, production, any environment that you want. You can use CI/CD with Service Fabric as well.
All right. So how can I ensure that code it's good to go in development or testing?
So you will deploy at the service level, you will do a testing of your application, you will create an instance of that service type, you will define your application using those services, and if you find it's good, then you roll it out in production. And if if it breaks it, you can always roll back, and it's always a rolling upgrade for each of the service type.
Yeah, generally we can use test the codes in Jenkins or Bamboo. So we have a tool, so we can test it. Then once the test code is fine, then you can test it in the development and testing and UAT. Then finally we can touch with this production. So if in case anything happens, then we can go with this rollback of CI/CD platform. But you said it's a bit deeper.
Yeah, so let's say you have 10 application, each is making use of your service type 1. You will roll out change at the service level. You will not roll the survey, changes at the application level, which you will do in case of Jenkins today. So if you are using Jenkins today for your CI/CD, your changes will be at the application level, right? Whereas if you start using your Service Fabric, in that case, your changes will be at the service level. Now, the same tool can be used, for CI/CD to deploy the changes at the service. And in case Azure Service Fabric will automatically heal it if there is any problem. Let's say you deployed a service and which break your application. Azure Service Fabric has its internal infrastructure which will load balance, which will create another instance of service type, and it will spin up that, and it will dynamically load balance for your application is still running. Because application is not code. Application is making use of service types. It's a template of multiple services. So it's auto healing infrastructure for you. It's microservices gives you auto healing. It has load balancing. It has name resolution. It can spin up multiple instances of your service type to take care of your increased workload. Now Jenkins cannot do that. Cannot meet the performance. Obviously, you have auto scaling for different platforms, but in this case, this auto scaling is not at the server level, not at the platform level, but it's at the service level. it goes much granular, and it gives you much in density, when you're hosting that application onto platform. So you can just think about it, right? So on web app, you had IIS VM on that, you will host only one web server, one application. You went and then you went into the web app where you can host application on the PaaS platform. Then you go further deeper wherein on the same server you can have multiple applications running on top of that, and you have these catalog services running on that server which can be consumed by your application. So you can have hundreds of applications running on single server.
All right, so you can segregate the load of the web apps to service types, right?
Yeah, so your web application will consist of multiple service types. So I can show you, all this will become clear once I deploy an application, that will help you understand. This is more on coding level.
Yep.
Okay. So let's move on to the next slide. So this is the cluster architecture. This is in a typically diagram for our IaaS or the infrastructure architect. So what goes behind the scene when you deploy a cluster. So when you deploy cluster, as you know, it's a cluster is a collection of VMs. All these are identical VMs. So this will be, when we will deploy the service fabric in the background, what it does is it deploys depending on how many VMs that you take, it deploys a scale set. So you will have one VM, then second VM, third, and depending on how many. Now all these VMs, since all these VMs are put in as a single scale set, and if you have attended the last session where we talked about scale set, as a part of scale set, Microsoft will also provision a load balancer for you. So anybody and everybody trying to hit this a virtual name that you will create as a part of that scale set will come through the load balancer. Now when the scale set we created that set, it stopped there, but service fabric goes beyond that, and once it has provisioned all these servers using a scale set, it deploys a service fabric SDK, you can say service fabric component, and service fabric is a software which runs on top of all the VMs, and that service fabric in terms communicate with each other on the node itself. As a part of that provisioning, you will see, and we will see that we'll get load balancer, we'll get the VMs, will also the service fabric will get deployed on top of that. And you can it exposes three kind of ports for you. One port is to for service fabric, which you see 19080, that is service fabric manager. So you can manage, you can visualize what's going on the service fabric level, which application is hosted, which node is hosting that, how many instances are running that. That's exposed on 19080. The second one is the 80 or 443. That's for typically if you have hosted an application, that application needs to be accessed. That will be on port 80 or 443. That's a regular. The third one is which is usually it's 19,000 port, which is for client. So if you need to deploy any code, any application, in that case you will use that port, and we will see these things in action wherein I will use a Visual Studio to deploy a code, and once that code is deployed, we will come to the portal and look at the code that is deployed. We'll look at the versions, and then finally we'll also hit that website from the internet browser and see whether it is working or not. So that's the complete infrastructure. Now service fabric, at the infrastructure layer you had a VM, and on top of that VM you have the service fabric which is installed, right? Now within the service fabric itself you have different components which takes care of, and all these components are, you can say that it's a part of your service fabric. So you have the first component is called cluster manager. Now this cluster manager, or sometimes it also called failover and cluster manager that you have. So cluster manager is this is what this manages the life cycle of applications. So if you deploy an application, this cluster manager will decide where to place your code, where to place your services, on which node, whether it will go on VM1, whether it should go on VM2 or VM3, depending on what's the workload utilization of those VM, it will dynamically decide where to host that. That's your cluster manager. Basically, that manages the cluster of entire VM and where it should go. The second one is the failover manager, which is, again, all these components are part of Service Fabric. Okay, this code that we're talking about, Service Fabric, has all these components. So the failover manager will, let's say, your this VM goes down. So what this failover manager will do is it will port your code from VM2 to VM3. And if VM2 comes back online, it will rebalance. So basically, the failover manager is responsible for failover, rebalances the service instance. And when I say service instance, you remember we had service type, and then multiple service type consist of an application. So an application can have 3 service type, for example. And if your one service type or node has gone down, it will create and spin up another instance of that service type on another node. So this is handled by failover manager. And this is when it does it automatically. It will redistribute your workload, service type workload across the nodes. So that's the second component. That third component is naming. This is the component which handles the mapping of the services. So as I said, every service has a name, fabric / your application / your service. So this maintains a registry of all the services that you have hosted on Service Fabric. And when one service calls to other service using that name, this is what traps that, and it routes the request to the appropriate endpoints. So this is what is responsible. This is third component that is part of Service Fabric. The fourth is called fault analysis. It will, if you really want to test any kind of fault, so you can, for testing purposes, if you want to really do that, that fault analysis component will let you inject that faults. The fifth one is image store. That's where when you deploy the packages, and I will show you when we deploy the package, that gets first pushed up into image store, and from there it gets into into different services instances that we create on top of it. So you can have one code, version 1, version 2, all that gets stored in image store, and from there, if the Service Fabric has to spin up another instance of service, it will go and check the image store. From there it will pick the package, and from there it will dynamically create the instances of those service. So that's basically image store. You can think about image store is more on your Microsoft VM galleries, right? So we have these galleries where you can host those VMs. Similarly, that's at the VM level. It's here at the code level. It's at the service level. For every service, you have a package. So basically, you will store those images into image store. Image store is one. And finally, the upgrade component. This is only exclusive for Azure. It's not available if you're running on-prem, if you're running in any other cloud. So Microsoft has this, wherein it lets you upgrade your Service Fabric automatically if you want to, or if you want to have manual upgrade, you can, because Microsoft keeps releasing Azure Service Fabric SDK and the software update. So you can opt for an automatic, or you can also opt for manual, depending on what's your test compatibility level is. So this is in nutshell the the infrastructure architecture of the Service Fabric, what is going behind the scene, right? So let's move into the demo, wherein I will try to create a cluster and see how it goes, and we'll talk about all those options that we talked about right now. In fact, I already have a Service Fabric cluster deployed. It takes time, so I've already pre-created, but I will walk you through, how to do it. So,
before I jump into the demo, can we share the subscription for the? Sorry, this is a service. Fabric service can share in the subscription.
Yeah, you can.
If I have multiple subscription.
Yeah, it exposes public endpoints. If you expose through public endpoint, you can do that.
So you mean to say the Fabric services should be running in the load balancer? Then I have to configure in the traffic manager with the performance or whatever it is.
No, you don't have to. You don't have to do it. It will do it automatically for you.
Okay.
And you can have across multiple subscription, you need the connectivity. And I think Rusker did pose this question, can I have? So as a part of Service Fabric cluster, it creates a VNet, and then you can create a VNet to VNet VPN or VNet to on-prem VPN, and you can reach out to that Service Fabric without any problem.
All right. It's cool.
So let's go ahead and create a service fabric. So if I click on create, so this is the beginning point. So it's asking me for the cluster name, and this is the cluster which is since I'm hosting in Azure, this will be publicly reachable. That will be my cluster name. So I can say cloud easy SF service fabric. I've already taken that. This is going to be service fabric 1. Now here you choose your operating system, and I was talking about that right now it's supposed 2012 R2. So this is the infrastructure on which Microsoft will deploy Azure Service Fabric software. Okay, Azure Service Fabric is a software which runs on top of an infrastructure as a service VM as a part of ScaleSet. You have two options, three options: 2016 data center and then 2016 data center with containers. If you want to make use of that, I think container is still in preview, but if you want to play around with that, you can select that, or you can select 2012. So this is on the Windows side. On the Linux side, Ubuntu, it is still in preview. So Microsoft has started supporting Ubuntu, but it's still in preview. So depending on what you want to choose, you can choose. So I will choose Windows 2012 R2 data center. This is where you specify your username when you log on to any of the VMs which will get provisioned in the background. So I will give the username as EA and password. Then you select a subscription. I will leave it, and then you specify the resource group. So I will create a new resource group, and you specify the location. So location is East US, depending on where you want to create it. So you give your service fabric cluster name, you give your operating system, you give your VM username, password, resource group, and then you say OK. In the next step, where we will configure the Azure Service Fabric related information. Now this is where this gets important. It is asking you how many node type count. So during my discussion during our session, I said that you can have multiple node type. Now what this node type means is you can have different kind of services. One set of service could be compute intensive. So you will choose compute optimized series of VMs. One set of services could be memory optimized. It's a memory hungry. In that case, you will select memory intensive or memory optimized VM series. One service could be storage hungry. In that case, you will select storage optimized VM series. So this is where you will be able to select. So if I say 3, in that case, what will happen is it will ask me to choose every node type VM size, and it will provision those VMs in the background. So one I can have compute optimize. One I can have, this is where you'll select the VM size. One I can have memory optimize. This is where you will select your VM size. Or one I can have storage optimize, and this is where you select the VM size. So maximum you can have 3 node type, and each node type is determine the what kind of architecture VM architecture would it be, whether it will be compute optimized or memory optimized or storage optimized, depending on what set of services you will host on that, you will select those node type. But for simplicity, I will select node type 1, so that I know that all my services are either compute optimized or memory optimized. This is very generic, so I will keep that node type count to 1. Once you select that, this is where you will come and you will pass on the extra information. So this is a node type name. So what kind of node? So I will say it's a general node type, or maybe you can say compute optimize. What? Is there a space? Oh, it's only 9 character. Okay, sorry. So compute compute optimized. Durability tier, this is where you will they let you select two kind of durability tier, bronze and gold. Depending on which tier you select, you will get to select different kind of VMs. If you select gold tier, you will get beefy VMs to select from, and if you select bronze, that you will have lower sizes SKUs that you have. So depending on what you're going to run, so like bronze tier only supports A series, D series, and DS series, but gold tier supports T5 and other series. So depending on what you need, so I will select bronze tier for my durability, and this is where I select my virtual machine size, what I want to select. So I will keep it to minimum, so that I don't incur a lot of charges on my subscription. So I will go with A0. So let it populate, and if I come down, I should see A0. And depending on what's your requirement, you can select any VM series size, but for my demo I will select A0, and I say select. So that's the VM size that it will provision for my node type, because I have only one node type. And now you can select how many VMs that will get provision as a part of this scale set. So how many service fabric, how many nodes will be there in your service fabric cluster. So you have 5. I will go with 3, so that I can select it. But when you select less than 5, it gives you a warning message that it will be designated as test cluster. So if you are running a production, you should have at least 5. That's your beginning point. If you go less than that, it will be designated test cluster, and that means that you're trying to test it. So in my case, I will just leave it 3. This custom endpoint, this is where you specify the endpoints using which you will access your application. Now this application I will access on port 80 and 8080. So these are the ports that I want to open. You can also open if any other ports that you want to open, like 443, you can do so. That way you can do that. Reverse proxy, I'm not going to cover that. Reverse proxy is the same concept as if you have web application firewall. So you can also configure reverse proxy for services communication. So when services communicate to each other and you want to reach out to these services from internet, as Uday, you said that I want to reach out from any other places. In that case, you can enable the reverse proxy. But if you're keeping it within the your on-prem and you just want to access these services only, so in that case you will not enable the reverse proxy. I'm not going to enable the reverse proxy. I will just leave as is. So let's review the setting once again. What we did, we gave the node type name, we selected the durability bronze, and then I selected the virtual machine size for each of my node that will go in the cluster. Then I selected how many VMs I will require. 5 is what's minimum for production. If you go below that 3, it is designated as a test cluster, and that means that you're using it for testing. Then finally we define the custom endpoint. This is how we will access application hosted on the service fabric. So depending on what port it is, my port is 8080, so I've opened that. You can open multiple ports, 80, 8080, 443, and 8172, so on, depending on what port your application will run on. And then finally reverse proxy, I'm not going to configure reverse proxy. I say okay.
What about the single node cluster, which was there, that question?
Yeah, so that single node cluster is if you want to have only one node in your cluster instead of 3, which is purely purely testing for development. You will not want to do that for production. So that's the option that it gives you. Then if you come into the advanced setting, you can enable the diagnostics. So by default it is turned on. If you want to connect this service fabric to application insight, which is application monitoring tool from Microsoft Software as a Service, you can do so. Finally, this is where I was talking about the upgrade, right? So this upgrade is unique to Azure. You will not get this option when you host it on-prem. So you can choose between your upgrade between automatic or manual. So depending on if you're running a workload and you're not confident that Microsoft Service Fabric version will kill you, in that case, will kill your application. In that case, you can set it to manual, and then you can always select that. So if I select it manual, I have different Fabric versions that I can deploy. These are the versions that I have available. But if I select it automatic, in that case, Microsoft will take care of Fabric upgrade. Now, when I say Fabric version, as I said, you have VM. On top of that, this Azure Service Fabric gets installed. Even that Fabric also has to be upgraded. It's same like operating system, right? So operating system has to be upgraded. Similarly, this particular application which runs on top of operating system has to be upgraded too. So Microsoft can upgrade it for you if you do it automatic. If you do it manual, then you'll have to do it manual. And then there is a cool off period. I think within 60 days you will have to choose whenever a new version gets available. And if you don't, then Microsoft will upgrade it even in manual. So 60 days you have to test and all of this stuff. And I don't know if 60 or 90 days, but I can confirm on that. But I will keep it automatic so that it does it for me. And then there are some custom Fabric settings that you really want to do it. You can add those parameters and values, but I don't have anything, so I will just leave as is. So I will go ahead and say okay. This is the security section. So typically in production you will specify your certificates so that the communication between the services are on SSL, and so that the communication is encrypted in transit. So in that case, you will upload your certificate in your key vault, and from there you specify that key vault and the URL and the thumbprint. So it will bring that, and then secure it. But I don't have it, so I will leave it unsecure, and I will say okay. And this is what's going to give me the summary. This is my computer, so it will create 3 VMs of standard A0 size. These are the custom ports, and then once I create it, I will start provisioning. By the time it is provisioning, I already have a Service Fabric which I want to show you, which I have provisioned. It takes time, 20 to 25 minutes. I don't want to waste that much time. So I have already pre-provisioned this Service Fabric. So if you come into the property of the Service Fabric, you can see that I have 3 VMs in the same General 0 and General 1 and General 2. That's the name given. And if you look at the endpoints that I have, so the endpoints, this is the endpoint for my Service Fabric from where I can manage this Service Fabric. This is the endpoint from where I deploy the code to this Service Fabric. This is my Service Fabric Explorer, from where I can explore the health of my Service Fabric, how it looks like, and what's going on. But let me show you what it does in the background. So I deployed this in my resource group called AzureTalk demo, Cloud Easy demo. And if I come here, you can see as a part of when I deployed this, it has deployed VM skill set, which you can see over here. It also gave me a public IP to my load balancer. You can see this is a load balancer that it has deployed, and then a public IP is associated with it. So if I click on this load balancer, you will see that all the backend pool is for these 3 VMs that I have created. These are the skill sets. So if you look at the backend pool, you will see these 3 load balanced VMs that we have in the backend pool, and which is load balanced with all these rules that has been created. So one rule is for the application port 1, port 2, port 3, and then the HTTP role. So if you look at these rules, you will be able to see that that I have defined my ports, which is for the 80 number port, and then another one was for 8080. Yeah. So basically, when you define all those in the background, it will provision the entire infrastructure for you, configure those information for you, and configure all your NATing rules. If you look at inbound NAT rules, you have these NAT rules that you have. This is for the RDP. Anybody wants to come there, and then it will also define the load balancing rules for you. So you can see that I have HTTP rule, which is 19080. That's for the Service Fabric. This 1900 is for deploying the code. I defined 3 different ports for my application, so port 80, 8080, and 8712. These 3 ports that I defined, and I can access this. When I host my application, I can access over these ports. Front-end IP, if you look at it, this load balancer has been assigned a public IP address. This is my public IP address, which got provisioned as a part of Service Fabric cluster provisioning. So these are something that Microsoft does in the background. It's on the same sort of what happens when you create a scale set. It creates a scale set, it creates a load balancer, it creates a public IP for that, and then in this case it also provisions Service Fabric on top of these VMs, and plus it also creates a VNet. Now, Rusker had a question which he posted in IM. Can we create peering or a connection? Yes, you can do that. And if you can, do a peering between, obviously, peering is also supported between classic and modern. So you can use ASM and ARM, that peering you can do, or you can also create a VPN if you really want to do that. You can also do that. That's possible. And your Service Fabric cluster sitting in one VNet in Classic can talk to Service Fabric cluster sitting in another VNet in ARM. That's a possibility. So let's see. So these are the properties that I want to show you. Now let's come back to the Visual Studio. So I have this application which which I'm following this article. Probably I will share that after this the session is over. I'll publish that in the I'm following this article from Microsoft which talks about how to create a .NET Service Fabric application in Azure, which I will post in the chat, and also I will subsequently, it will be available in my blog that I will publish, a video blog I will publish after this session. So what I've done is as a part of this application, you have to do certain prep work. So obviously you have to install a Visual Studio 2017, which I did, this is 2017. Then you'll have to install Git, which is the Git repository, because it creates a local copy of the published, which is in the GitHub. So this is where Microsoft has published this .NET Quick Start application. So you will need the Git application to clone it. So I have already done that. Then finally you have to install the Microsoft Azure Service Fabric SDK, which I already done it. And in the last but not the least is you will have to configure your PowerShell so that it can run script, because by default PowerShell doesn't allow you to run any untrusted application or untrusted script, and as a part of this application it runs in a script. So you can open a PowerShell in with the admin, so you have to run it as an administrator, and then you run this command. So basically what it will do, it will set the execution policies so that you can run any script, and this will call a script. This particular application does call a script, a PowerShell script, to deploy your application. So when you do that, it will set the execution policy, and it will set it to unrestricted. So that means you can run any kind of script from your current environment. So I have already done it, but I just want to show you. So you can follow that article, and then after this clone is what you have to do it. Once you clone it, it will get downloaded into your local, and then you open that solution file. It's a voting application into your Visual Studio, which I have already done it. You can see that I have this voting application. So when you open your Visual Studio first time, you'll have to connect to your Azure subscription. So it will ask you to log in. So for me, I've already done it, but in case you have downloaded Visual Studio 2017 first time, it will ask you to log in, and when you log in, it will connect you to your Azure subscription. Can you hear me?
Yeah, Neeraj.
Okay, sorry. I thought Ali is having problem. All right, so this is where you will open your solution file that you have downloaded. So you can. I mean, in my case, I already had it open, but if you have downloaded the application, you can just open that application. So once you have just downloaded that application, it will look like this, wherein you have your voting applications, and this application will will be part of your Visual Studio. So on the right side you will see which is Solution Explorer, and this is where you will open it. So I already have it open. So this is your application. It's very simple. It's a voting application which you can host it locally. You can buy this article that I'm talking about. This will give you two options, and both options you can check. You can run it locally, and there's different way to run it locally, and plus run it on the Service Fabric cluster. So I will run it on the Service Fabric cluster. So you will click on the voting and then click on publish. So right click, come on. Sorry. Okay, so here you have publish. So you right click on your solution, which is the voting, and then I say publish. The moment I click on publish, it will, since I'm already logged in with my credentials for my Azure credentials, so it will pick up from Azure that I have the Service Fabric, and this application, if you look at it, it has voting data, and it should connection endpoint, it should pick up one for me. Come on. So I need to refresh it. It will show me my connection endpoints. Yeah, so you can see that it picked up my Cloud Easy SF. This was the first one. The second one is getting created. You can see SF1. I don't know it's ready or not, or you can also select local cluster. But in my case, this one I know it's already ready. It was there, the prior to one, and I can select that, and once I've selected that, I just click on publish. So basically what it will do, it will create the build, it will generate the exe in required file, and then it will publish it on to cloudeasysf.es, cloudapazure.com. Let's go ahead and publish it. And meanwhile, we'll look at the Service Fabric cluster that we have included. So if you come into your Service Fabric, so this is my Service Fabric. So if you come the property of the Service Fabric, it gives you a URL for your Service Fabric Explorer. This is, you can see over here, this is the Service Fabric Explorer. From there you can look at the health of your Azure Service Fabric itself. So if I click on that, it will fire up a new URL or new browser for me, where I can look at and this works on 19080 port. So it will show me, my Service Fabric. So you can see this is the console which looks like for your Service Fabric, and this is where you will have your application. So in my case, I don't have an application; it is still being deployed. Once that will deployed, you will see your application. Under that, you will see your service type. Under that, you will see your services. Under services, you will see your code or your data or config if you have defined as a part of your service. If I come into my nodes, I can see that I have 3 nodes, general 0, and you can look at if there is an application deployed on that. No, I don't have. This is the private IP of my VM. General 1, this is the private IP of that VM. This is general is public private IP of that VM. I don't have anything. This is where I was talking about. Remember, I said that we have different services. So this is a cluster manager service which manages the cluster. This is where you can come and look at the property. It can, if there is any problem right now, it's in whole health status is okay. This is a service type. This is the version that is running. So cluster service manager service type. The second one is the failover manager, which manages the failover of your cluster if any problem is there. Fault analysis service we talked about. So fault analysis services, when you want to inject the fault to check the test the infrastructure, like any failure in your services, that you can do that. Image storage services, this is where your we store the packages, we store the images. This you can all look at. So yeah, this is the primary. This guy is the primary. For all these are active secondary. So that gets replicated for that. Naming services is your for name resolution within the services. So each service is called by its name, right? So those you can look at those properties, which is playing the primary naming services. So this is your different service for Azure Service Fabric. And then finally you have this upgrade service. So upgrade service, currently this is the version, and in case upgrade has to happen, it will give you those details. So let's see what is the status of application. It is getting built. You can see package started. So it will take maybe a couple of minutes. That's my experience, and then it pushes it out. So the moment it will push out, we will see something over here popping up in application soon, and we will see those everything that we talked about. We talked about we talked about application type, and then within application type service types, and then within the service type we talked about the code and data. You will see all those visually here over here, and each code and data can be individually versioned, and you can have code version 1 and data could be a version 2. That's also a possibility. So let's see. And you can change your manifest version if you really want to. If I come in my voting, and if I go into the edit, it's currently the build is going on, so I cannot edit the manifest. But if I do that, I will have option to change the version of my code and my data. So we talked about code, we could talk about config, we talk about data. So all this can be independently versioned, and these three combined defines your service type. So in our case, the service type is your voting data is one service type. The second is your voting web. This is your second service type. This is where we define different service types. And when you deploy this application, since it's a pre-built, but when you're starting as a fresh, you'll have to select Service Fabric template as a type of your application. And that's when it will ask you for what kind of services you need, and you need to define that. So you can look at all these are defined based on the services. So you have I have voting web service, which is for the web front end. Then I have voting data, which is service, and this voting is the application which consists of all these services that it will consume. So that's how you define in your application. This is purely into coding level. You have to work to design your application. You have to create a service map for your application. So you have to define, sometime you have to define base services, and when you define, then you code it, and then you can start consuming those services as a part of new application, or you can also build your own service type as a part of your new project. So
during this coding, do we specify anything related to Azure or anything, the fabrics, service fabrics which we created, other than in the deployment side you selected that? So anywhere in the code, do we need to specify any connection point towards that?
No, except the publish. So when you publish, that's when you will specify whether you want to deploy in Azure, or you want to deploy on-prem, or you want to deploy locally. It's it has nothing to do with Azure. Only the Azure comes into the picture to host your Service Fabric hosting platform. Application has nothing to do with it. You can host your services anywhere.
All right, so Neeraj, it's like a managed services, completely the Azure Fabric service running as a managed services. But how about you are responsible for your services? If I'm going to run a WordPress in my Fabrics, in the Fabric services, so how can I get a support from Microsoft if I have?
Yeah, so so now it will depend. If you're using running .NET code, and if you have enterprise agreement with Microsoft, you can open a case with them to get support on application level and coding level. If it is Linux and PHP, you will have to open the case with the PHP organization. I don't know who supports it, but that's where you'll have to. Coding level support you will get from Microsoft if you have enterprise agreement and you're using .NET.
So the Microsoft products can support by Microsoft in case any other PHP or any other
No, yeah, they will not
code
support.
languages. So we have to get in touch with the vendor.
Yeah, that's right. So I mean, coding level support also you will get it, but that has slightly different, because if that code is .NET, then certainly you can use your enterprise agreement, support agreement with Microsoft, and open a case with Visual Studio team, and they can help you. So okay, so right now you can see it's saying uploading to image store, and we talked about, right, we have image store, so this has created a package, and that package is getting uploaded to the image store. So hopefully this time we should see something here. If we refresh it, yep, you can see now it's right. The voting type is my application, which has got created right now. And if you come here, it is still populating. This is my application, so voting type is my application, and then under that I will see two services, web service and data service. So hopefully it will get provision. And version type is 2 because I have updated it to version 2, and you can always change that by clicking the manifest. So let's see. Now it's registering the application, so that's why we could see that name there. After this, as we'll say, registering services, and after that we'll see it in the Service Fabric Explorer. It is still populating. So yep, it says creating application succeeded, connecting, executing the script. So this is the Fabric voting data is not ready, now is ready. So voting data and web, these are the two services that it has provision, and this is what I talked about, URL, right? Fabric : / and your application name, and then your service name. This is how you will refer your services if you want to interact with each other. That's the name, like HTTP name that we give for our HTTP URL. Similarly, Service Fabric name is given that way. So let's come here. We should see now. So here you can see, right, I have Fabric voting. Now if I come here, it will show me. So these are the two services. So the voting is my application, which is at the top level, and under that voting application consists of two service type. One is called voting data, which is for storing the data that and then the another one is the front end, which is the web. So these are the two services which define this application. Within each service you have code and config. So if I go in the details, maybe so if I should go in details, I could see just my XML file. It is still populating. Oh, it's done. Okay. Yeah, so this is done. So now I should be able to, so right now you can see that this is right now the primary is general 2. This particular voting data service is running on general 2. These are active secondaries. If something happened to this guy, it will fail over to these two secondary nodes. Similarly for my voting web, it is running on the general one. And if I come on the nodes, under the nodes, now you can see that on general 0 I have Fabric voting data package, general 1 I also have voting data package and web package, both are running on that. So I have, for data package, I have two instances of the same service, one running on general 0 node, one running on general 1 node. On general 2 I have only data package. So your data package is running on general 1 and general 2. Okay, so that's the view. Now let's see if this service fabric is accessible. So the port number that I have configured it 8080, and this is my URL. And if I hit it, it should be able to render me the web page. let's see. Maybe I can open another one. So hopefully this should get me the page of my, yep, it's coming up. So you can see, right? So this is what is Service Fabric voting sample. Somehow, this voting doesn't work when I'm hosting it in Azure. That's coding problem. That's not the Service Fabric infrastructure problem.
Actually, Neeraj, sorry to interrupt you here. I've seen this happening, and whenever I have or others have tried to do it in an Azure VM. Are you running it inside an Azure VM, or are you running in the same network as in Azure? Because I've seen the same problem happening.
Yeah, so this is, I'm running from a laptop. So if I add it, it's not adding, but that's, yeah. But if I run it locally, then it works. But that's something in the code thing I have to really look into that. But yeah, this website is now live, and it's accessible, and you can look at the Service Fabric cluster. This is where you have your applications, which is hosted. Now, if I want to, I can deprovision this application if you really want to, and then you can deploy it. Or if you want to do an upgrade. So let's come back here. I was talking about the manifest. So I can make some changes, and where is that change? Yeah, this index.html that I have, if I come here and I can make this change and make it version, where is my version? I can say version 3. Yeah, so if I make it version 3, oops. And after making this version, you can publish it again, and this time instead of deploying it afresh, you can say upgrade. And when I say publish, and this time I made change only in the web service. I didn't make changes into any other services. This is where I can click on manifest version, and if I click on manifest version, you can see this is my application type, voting type, right? And the version is 2. My voting data package, I have 2 services inside that. I have voting data package and voting web package, and if you expand that, you have code and config. I don't have data section. Remember, if I refer back you to the PowerPoint, I said any application that you have will consist of multiple service type, and every service type will have either code, config, or data. So data is your persistent data that has image or any file. But in my case, this application doesn't have any data at all. So that's why you see only code and config. So code and config together defines the service type, and then 2 service type together defines the application type in my case. And this is what I was referring to. So in my case, you have voting web package, and then you have code and config. So I can make the changes if I want to. So I can say the version 3.0.0. In fact, you can also upgrade at the code level. So if you have made any changes to the code, nothing else will get impacted. You will just only the code will get upgraded. Okay, so that way you can specify. So this is the manifest version that you control. So once I save it, and here, when you're deploying first time, this will be unchecked. But since I'm going to upgrade the application, that's when I will say upgrade the application. And once you publish it, it will basically publish this as an upgrade, but not as an override. In fact, if you don't have this checked when you try to do that, it will say there is an already application, and it will fail. So you have to, first time you don't have to click that, so that because it's a new instance of that application that will get deployed on Service Fabric. But in a subsequent upgrade, you have to select and upgrade the application. And I say publish. So
and Neeraj, you said before putting on publish, there was a option of configure upgrade settings. So whatever we did just right now, we changed the version, right?
Yeah.
So does that configure upgrade option also points to the same option of changing the versions, or is it another set of settings that we would require to change?
I think it should be another set of settings which we need to do. Maybe once it is done, we will look into that.
Okay.
But I really didn't get into deeper. Maybe Rushkar can, because he's more experienced in Service Fabric and the coding level than
Okay.
I'm more from infrastructure side. But
Right.
We have one more person called Lijo. He is also using this one for a longer
great.
time. Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah, this is more. So there are two pieces to it, right? So one is hosting platform, and then what goes on hosting platform. So from the hosting platform perspective, probably I can explain. But what goes on in the code, that's something falls in the domain of the developer and the application architect. Right?
Okay.
So right now you did an upgrade. So we have simultaneously two versions available. So if I want to fall back due to some problem, I can fall
Yeah.
back to the.
Yes, you can do that. And in fact, you will see here. So right now, if I voting data, if you look at the version is 1, right? So we made a change in the voting web. This version is 2. It should change to 3 once that upgrade is done.
One question while it gets upgraded, right? What I have seen is I've not been so familiar with microservices, but what I've done is in the past model itself, I've coded some basic programs and websites. What I have seen is that you get the option of deployment slots where you can host and swap the web apps or app services between the test and the development. What happens is that the moment you make a change in your code, you test it in a dev environment, which you get in the production dev slots in your app services plan, and then you swap it with the one which is already running in the production, so that you can introduce a new feature. So is there any such options available for microservices also, or they follow some other procedure where these things can be done, where you give two options, one for production, the other one for
So
testing?
maybe what you can do is you can have multiple application type: app dev, app UAT, app QA, app prod, running on the same service fabric with different endpoints, and you can deploy that. And as far as deployment slot is concerned, intrinsically it's not available, but you can script it, or you can point your public IP of your load balancer to
Yeah, because the only other challenge I see here is that in deployment slots itself, the only thing that was supposed to be changed was the connection string with their backend database. Apart from that, rest all the things remained same while swapping between the deployment slots. So I was thinking, for example, this
So,
microservices, if has some backend database to it, or is referring to any database, what will happen? Yeah, go on, Neeraj. Sorry.
yeah, so in case of in a service fabric is auto healing, right, as opposed to web app. Web app is manual. Now, if something happens, you'll have to swap the deployment slot, and that's why you have deployment slot. But in case of Azure Service Fabric, it recognizes, it can see that one of my service type is in red, and it will show you error. The moment it says in red, it will roll back and it will create an instance, another one. So it's auto healing, and that's why probably we don't have deployment slots here. But if you want to, you can do it manually. Somehow it looks like the deployment upgrade failed, so I need to see why it failed. So PowerShell script failed to execute. See the
Hey, Neeraj.
Yeah.
Hey, this is Lijo. I can explain that question. The thing is, if we in Service Fabric, if we upgrade the application, it ensures you a zero downtime for the update. The thing is like for each node type, it will distribute those nodes into different update domains. So once you upgrade an application, it will update the domain one by one. So you don't have any application downtime, and you don't need a specific slot for that.
No, Lijo, the thing is, when I was referring to deployment slots, not only they are actually the primary role of deployment slots is not necessarily for high availability or zero time. However, the requirement of deployment slots is for continuous development, where you are continuously testing your feature right in the separate deployment slot, and once that is tested and is successful, you on the fly swap it with the production slot so that you get the functionality of the new feature, right? And
Okay.
without actually major disconnection or downtime. So my idea was to understand, if there is such possibility available in microservices, because what I have done so far in the past model itself, I have perceived it as the in the terms of deployment slot, and that is the most catchy feature I could see for the app services.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, I think for deployment slot, if you're talking about CI/CD, probably you can have multiple instances of same application, one for dev, one for UAT, one for QA. But obviously there is no native feature available for deployment slots.
Okay.
Yeah, in our case, actually, for dev and QA and for production, we have different cluster environment,
Yeah, that also.
and
Right.
we had the release manager configured over there, which will push this application through PowerShell script.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, when we do it that way, there are a little bit moving parts that we need to manage. Whereas deployment slots is a managed stuff where you just don't need to worry about what's going under the hood. All you need to do is just test your code in the other slot. Actually, what I remember earlier, I'm sure it has changed now. It used to come with default five production slots and around 2 or 3 deployment slots. So what you used to do was you test it there in the dev slot and just swap it between it. And I remember when it was a cloud services in the ASM model, they had staged and some development and stage or production things. It was not a slot. So that was a difference when we talked about web apps and app services between the ASM and ARM model.
Yeah. So I think that's it. That's what I had. Obviously, this upgrade has failed for some reason. I need to look into why it failed. Says it has something to do with my processor architecture. It says character 30. So I need to really look into that. But anyway, that's how you do the upgrade. So you can do an upgrade, a rolling upgrade. The system will automatically maintain it, and if that upgrade breaks that service, it's not in working condition, it will roll back, and it will continue to function. So this is your Service Fabric Explorer, from where you can see the health of all your clusters that you have, your application deployed on that, the nodes that you have, plus the system components of your Service Fabric cluster, cluster manager and failover manager and other services. I know, we are way past our allotted time. It happens every time, but this time it was my mistake. I don't know, somehow my internet was not working. I really apologize for that. Any closing questions? Any closing comments?
Just one thing, Neeraj, it was blessing in disguise for me that it got delayed for you, because even I got late for the session today. So at least I could catch up with some of the part.
Okay, all right. Sometime, yeah, it works for us. All right, thank you.
One question from my side. This is Ranjit. See, do we need to? Is there any specification for to use a public IP, or can we use a completely internal to the organization?
Yeah, you can. I mean, you don't need to define your public IP. You can have internal load balancer. You can do that using JSON script. So if you deploy through the portal, it gives you public IP. But if you don't want to do that, you are more than welcome to deploy through JSON script. And
Okay.
And you don't specify any public IP for your load balancer. So in this case, this is an external load balancer. You will create an internal load balancer. All right. Anything else?
Hey, Neeraj, Ramesh here.
Yeah, Ramesh.
Yeah, could you add few words about the service partition as well as the replicas? How those are playing the key role in the service fabric?
Sure. So, as far as the replica is concerned, any code that you deploy, any service that you deploy, right? So it maintains standby copy, because if something happens to your server, in that case, the replication will take place. So any package that you deploy basically will have a replica, be it your service type, voting, in this case is voting data, or voting web. All these will have a replica which will be, hosted on another node. Now, partition is where you will maintain the data into, if you go beyond a certain limits, right? And your data is, so basically in the database parlance, if you know about sharding, right? So we partition the data, and then based on that data we shard, and we collect the data from two different locations, or two different portions. The same way here also the partition works. You can have data partition at one place, and then the other portion of data could be another partition, and you can make use of that. So that's something, in a nutshell, the partition and replica service. It's a service replica, which is, maintained on multiple nodes. It's maintained that, and then the partition is for actually for the data. I don't know if I answered your question, but maybe Lijo, you can add on to that, or anybody else want to add on?
Yeah, it's
Yes,
pretty
you are correct.
understandable. Yeah.
Yeah, basically partitioning is doing the sharding functionality, and these replicas ensure its reliability.
Yeah.
All right, Neeraj. So your time is 2:00. Sorry.
Sorry, and yeah, I know it's too late for you. Maybe probably next time we need to think about changing the time zone for you.
No, that's fine. So you were convenient. It's my convenient. That's fine. So no problem with it.
All right,
All right.
thank you guys.
Thanks,
Yeah,
Neeraj.
thanks
Much
everyone.
appreciated. So
Hey, thank you everybody
Hey,
for
Liju.
joining and staying. So
Thank you,
late.
Neeraj.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Neeraj.
Uh-huh.
thanks,
Thank you.
guys.
Bye. Cheers, guys.
Thank you, Neeraj. Bye.